Thank you very much, and it's great to be back. It's been a long time since I've been here, but I go back a fair way, and you will see it in some of the early slides. Your work has guided my work and has impacted some of the policy in the United States already. So, this is going to be the main theme, and I'm going to be introducing issues that you're very aware of, I've heard you all speak of, but you don't research here in the UK, and as a result you don't have the data as widely or as deeply as we do in the States. And as a result, it's rather difficult to introduce into the public discourse. So, I don't want to convince you of anything, but I do want you to hear and then reflect, because I can't tell you what to do. You'll find your own way how to apply this. But I do think I'm going to be talking about marriage and religion and the intimate connection between both, and the huge, and I can't overemphasize, the astronomical benefit and cost saving to government that religious practice is. It may even be greater than marriage, and you already know how impactful marriage is on the public purse, or the lack of marriage. And the same holds for religion, and you'll begin to see some of the reasons for that. One of the big things on public policy, you're learning it, we're learning it, there's a global movement. And I heard it in the reports this morning. We know it's global. The next places to be tackled and to be targeted on the life issue, we were saying, is Poland, probably Malta. We know where the next fights are going to take place. But also, culture is changing all across the world. And I think one of the big things driving culture, and will continue to drive it and change it for probably the next 100 years at least, and maybe many hundreds of years coming, is the application of breakthroughs in physics and biology and all the rest into technologies. And we like aspects of the technologies that come on. We all like the internet, but it has its downsides. We like television, but it has its downsides. We like this, and it has its downside. Okay, and so on and so on. We love the advances in medicine, but they have downsides. And it takes people, if you look back over history, when new technologies came in, they came rarely and slowly, and people had a chance to adapt to them. In my lifetime, they've just one after another, and before you can catch your breath, there's another one in, there's a new development in digital, and then there's this, there's Facebook, Snapchat, and the kids are going faster and faster, and the parents don't even know what the kids are doing, and it takes them a year to catch up, but the kids are already out further. The pace of change is really upsetting the patterns of living. And the way I would sum up cultures, my personal way, is that there's a wisdom generated over centuries and centuries of how to live life. Different people have slightly different ways of doing it. But there are patterns of culture. And for instance, most sex ed was done through the culture. There were things you did, and there were taboos. Taboos are rarely used, but on matters sexual, actually, taboos kick in. And taboos are very important in any functional society. They're like the defense mechanism. And it's where the culture slaps you hard if you step out of line too far. And on matters sexual, there are always taboos, or there always were taboos. And they were but they were hidden. And we didn't have to deal with taboos most of the time. There were ways of dating. I'm just thinking, I've got 2 children who are not yet married, or not yet settled in life. I've got one who's a priest. I don't want him to marry, but I don't want any grandchildren from him either. But the 2 who are still single, they're millennials, and it's chaos out there for millennials on the mating, how you find, and all the rest. Back in Ireland in the 60s, when I was beginning to date, there was a whole rhythm to it. You could date, but there was no commitment. Now, over in Washington, if you ask a girl on a date, it's a big thing if you call it a date. And they have to approach very slightly, and if they go on a second date, it's almost like you're getting married. You know, all the subtlety and the lovely steps that were there, from dating, when you could date 2 or 3 girls at the same time, hopefully not the same night, but the same time, and nobody was upset. And she could date others as she was, whoever she was, and so on. Then you started going steady, and then maybe you'd be called boyfriend and girlfriend. And then it began to settle down. But that all was there in the culture. There were things you did and didn't do. Now, our cultures are, and in a way, this is almost like a neutral way. Technologies are going to blow our cultures apart, even more than they are at present. That's my prediction. What's going to happen, I think, is that people will have to find other families and other groups who they can associate with, who want to live family the way they do, and particularly want to raise their children the way they think children should be raised. So that will cause people to identify their communities. And I think that's going to happen right across, no matter where people are on the moral spectrum. It's a human need. So people will need to find their, I would say, communities of faith, or communities of values, communities of orientation to life, in order to raise their children well. So, and I think actually that's why I would put the family and the church or temple or mosque or synagogue or meeting house or whatever it is will be the key part. And as life becomes more and more frenetic, saving time for the family and for community is going to be a big issue. We all already know. Probably the biggest, I think one of the biggest deficits or negatives with the whole technological culture is it has driven out time. I don't know if you remember back in the 60s and 70s, and a new implement come along and say, oh, that'll be a great time saver, you know, the washing machine or something like that. But now everybody's complaining we have less and less time. Actually, the machines are taking over, and we're trying to keep up with the machines we have created and have less and less time. Time is essential for a relationship. Marriage needs the time for conversation. Parents need the time with their kids if they are going to develop a relationship, influence them along the rest of them. The kids don't have time with the parents. Friendships need time. So I think time is going to be the big area that we're going to have to learn to protect. If we can protect ourselves on time, we can then protect our relationships. If we can't protect on time, then we're shortchanged, massively shortchanged. Okay, framework I've gradually developed. The way I work, the way my marriage works, my family, my community, and even the nation have a lot in common. I have all of us have 5 major tasks in life. The task of family, church, and by church there, even people who don't go to church or have a religion still have the task of working out the universals. Is there life after death? If there is, what is good? What is evil? How do I comport myself with that? They're the big issues of religion and reflection. So family, church, school, education, learning, a huge task. The marketplace, where we, by exchange of goods and services, we get what we need to live physically. And then government. I think there's an emerging, institutions have, these are all major institutions, they've developed gradually over time. They all started in the family. You go back to prehistory, you had families and community. Probably the first dual institution to emerge would be church and government. You go back into prehistory, there always was. Actually, you can see it in the Bible, but it was the same all around. King David was the leader of the religion, but he was also the government leader. And that was the same in all empires and that around that time. Gradually, they separate. The school comes along. The schooling was always within the family, but then it begins to separate and become specialized. The marketplace was always the family. Like if you go back English history, back, it was farms, and then how did the marketplace work? Well, you had the market. But okay, and so on. And I think what has emerged in our lifetime, a major institution, is healthcare. Healthcare was always deeply in the family. gradually came a bit out of it over the 1600s or so, when hospitals, or maybe around the Middle Ages, hospitals began to form. But then with the scientific and biological revolution, we learn a lot more, and it's become more and more specialized outside. But they're all deep in the family. Actually, the biggest thing in healthcare we've learned is exercise and diet. You know, if you take care of those two, you're probably going to, you may not need the doctor all that much in your life. If you get, where do you learn to practice that best? Right in the family. All these tasks are first learned in the family. This is not terribly clear here. Well, let's family, church, school, marketplace, government, and healthcare. They all tap into fundamentally different capacities we have. The different capacity we all have the capacity of force. When you join all that together in a specialized form, you really get government, because the basis of government is force. The police, the court, the prison, and we're in England, so it's not the guillotine, but it's the whatever you have. And then the use of force to keep external enemies out, the army. But this is government's big capacity. For education, it's intelligence. For the family, it's the tapping into sexuality. And by the way, this is one of the ways I think it would be worth discussing this and coming to, if we can develop real good shorthands. The family is the institution that specializes in sexuality. It is the sexual institution. And marriage is the institution within that is sexual. Now, the churches haven't fully caught up with this. I'm Roman Catholic, and it took the Roman Catholic Church, it took the Protestant Reformation to get the Roman Catholic Church to shape up on the education of priests. And it took the church 1,600 years to get that part right. And it didn't always get, you know what I mean by getting it regularized and getting it, so seminaries became more like what they should be by the 1600s. This is yet to happen across all faiths on the vocation to marriage, which is the more common vocation that most people are called to. And most churches are beginning to grapple with the beginnings of this. But the preparation for marriage in a specialized way is now a modern need. And no church that I know has it really done well. There are pockets that have it better than others. But what we're talking about here, the family is the institution of the sexual. And the institutionalizing of it comes in marriage. And everything else is a deinstitutionalizing of the sexual and a deinstitutionalizing of the family. So in some way we've got to find the language to claim this central as belonging to complementary sexes. It's only in the complementarity that you can have the fruit, which is the child. And I'm getting a little bit radical on it in my way of speaking on sexual ed. Look, I would say to a teacher today, assuming I wasn't thrown in jail, and maybe even if I am thrown in jail, sex ed, I'm the man who brought this boy into existence through the sexual act. I, and no one else, has the right to induct him into the same sexuality. I would go further. Actually, if you think this through, if the father is the one to lead his son, and the mother doing the same with the daughter, into the whole depths and understanding of the fullness of sexuality, you time it appropriately with their developmental stage. No matter what happens out there, if this is done deep in the family, nothing will beat that. A boy who is inducted into the fullness of sexuality by his father, who gradually teaches him things that men would never think of talking about. It's not within our normal nature to go there. Modesty, and actually the taboo against incest, which is the most universal and one of the severest taboos, almost militates against it, because we're getting into the sexual within the family. And the family in itself, this is why the only place the sexual happens in the family is in mom and dad's bedroom. And kids know nothing about it except the door is closed and you don't go in there. Again, so it flies a bit in the face, not of human nature, but of normal human cultures. But in our day, we have to overtake that. Now, if a father inducts his son into the sexual, and it has to happen early enough, just as the boy is beginning to find out, the father's got to get in there quickly, the mother's got to get in there quickly for the daughter, because of the presence of pornography. So it's got to be done before that, at least the basics, a bit before, then a talk on porn a bit later. And then how the father himself struggles with these issues. A boy being tutored by his father on how the father handles his sexuality is going to have huge impacts. And then later, as he reaches puberty, and as the girl reaches puberty, she's been inducted by her mother. And then there might be a bit of a cross later on, so the mother talks to the boy a bit after the father has fully inducted him, and likewise the father to the girl, but not in any intimate way. You keep the separation of the sexes modest there. But if that is done all the way through, I have much more to get through, but I think this, to me, is the pivotal issue in the whole cultural battle. In the home, deep in the privacy and sacredness of the home, will the father step up to the plate on his own son? And if you're not prepared to do that in the family, forget about anything in public policy. It doesn't make sense. I'm not saying there's nothing to be done in public policy if you do that. No. But without this, in this new day, the rest is secondary. But if this is done, you've already gained huge territory for the benefit of your children. And the boy by the age of 14, actually, and I think the girl has to be introduced, because the boy has got to realize you now have the capacity to be a father. And your sister, or your sister's friends, she now has a capacity to be a mother. And by the way, that's why you really honor women. They have the capacity for motherhood. They're designed for that. Everything about them is designed for motherhood. That's why they're made beautiful. That's why they have breasts. That's why they're curvaceous. That's why their hair is beautiful. Their skin is gorgeous, and all the rest of it. They're made that way to pull you in. We fall for it. Okay. And she's designed so that when your sperm would hit her egg, now you have a new baby. Right from that moment. And her body begins to change totally in reaction to that. And this is why you have to be very honoring of them and very careful. And for instance, for those, probably most people here come from some background of what are called natural law. But all of us are called to be virginal or celibate or pure or modest, whatever terms you use, until we are married. And some take it for life and stay celibate for life, like my son who's a priest. But that's a very different vocation. This is key, because the man has to learn self-control over the sexual if he's really going to be a good lover of his wife later. And the father has to introduce, look, porn has no effect if masturbation doesn't take place. Because that's the big reinforcer of the pleasure, and that's what quickly makes it addictive. The father has to teach his son about masturbation and its real downsides, and how he, as a father, conquered masturbation or put it away or whatever. And this is very intimate stuff. But this is the sex ed that really has to take place. And how he fights pornography. And if he slips or falls, what does he do? Why he battled with it before he was married, and he doesn't want to be unfaithful to your mother. I daren't look at a picture like that, because what am I doing? I'm being unfaithful to your mother, my wife. These sorts of talks from a father, and the similar from the mother. And by the way, on porn, it's huge now in its effects. 1/3 of the American army is erectile dysfunctional. Now, this is probably 1/3 of men are erectile dysfunctional. This is just good data. And that's out of porn. So it's a huge threat, actually, and it's a threat to the sexuality of the boys and of the future marriage. And among girls are now addicted at about 1/3 the rate of men. And it's increasing massively. I've done synthesis papers of that, and I had to update it this year for a talk. And the amount of change that's taken place in the last 7-8 years is just astronomical. And the addiction of women is one of the huge things, and the amount of women who are now watching porn is, enough said. So that the family is the institution that specializes in the sexual. So I'm calling all of you here, I'm saying, nobody has an out on this if you're a parent or thinking of becoming a parent, in my book. You have to prepare yourself to induct your child into the fullness of sexuality. So they hear it from you, not from the church, not from the school. They can hear it from there, etc., and all that after, but from you. And if you do that, they're inoculated in a way and led on the road path that the other stuff they have a much easier time combating it. Okay, within the family, all the institutions are learned, actually. Kids learn to work, they learn to study, they learn their faith, they learn sexuality. Actually, the biggest teacher of sexuality is the relationship between mom and dad. Without a word being said, that's how kids really get to understand it. Okay, and actually, they learn that in the family, and the father and the mother have those. If they're adept at the 5 tasks, you've got a good marriage. Man meets woman, and then they assess each other. If they're all good on family, church, school, marketplace, and government, they'll find their own ways to do it, but they have the capacities. You join that, you get double the bang for your money, and the kids are off to a great start. And then out into the community, and that's where the society at large then benefits in all its specialized tasks from what's actually happened in the family. 3 of the major institutions are deeply relational: family, church, and school. Government and marketplace are more instrumental. The relationship is important, but their ends are not personal. The ends are instrumental. Justice on the part of government. By the way I'd sum up, and I was Deputy Assistant Secretary for Family and Social Policy in HHS, which meant I was sitting on top of the biggest repository of evaluation data on government social programs. And there is not a single government social program, behavior changing program in the US that works, period. You've got micro programs that work at the local level, and you all will know of these. You know, there's a good school, or there's a great volunteer group, or alcohol addiction group, or whatever. You find individual things that work well. But if any of you know or have been involved in those, they have their risings and fallings, depending on leadership and staff and needs and all the rest. When things work, they always work in an idiosyncratic way, wherever you're dealing with the relation. And you cannot, and the data is replete with it. You cannot cookie cutter a program. They just don't work. It's a total waste of money on behavior changing. Government, and why? Because what makes social programs work is really the dedication, the love of the giver to the receiver. The person in need is getting dedicated service. It's the heart. I was a clinical psychologist. One of the key things actually in a therapeutic relationship going well is that actually the patient and the therapist, as it were, click. And if they don't, it's better the therapist quickly go to someone else. But everybody, it's the relationship is the vehicle through which the change takes place, any of the behavior changing things. You don't go to government for relationships. You go to it for justice. That relationship, yes. And government's main role is protecting the different institutions, but not growing them. And I think it's a strategic, massive mistake to be involved in trying to pull off behavior changing programs. All the reports this morning showed government totally fails on sex ed. There's not a single one that has worked and delivered what it's supposed to deliver. It's getting into that. But the same is true, actually, I have found in the United States on marriage programs, marriage ed, at the national level, they're not working. You got idiosyncratic ones. And I have my conservative friends who are dedicated a lot to this don't like me saying this, but then I come back and I say it because I have switched out of the public policy domain because of this relational area, because I don't want to spend the last part of my life doing something I know is going to fail. I'm now targeting my work much more at the family, the church, and the school. That's where the real change will take place. For government, yes, there's a lot that can be done, but it's mainly to protect. In other words, to punish violation. The best illustration of this sort of thing, there was one group in the United States in the very social policy area of drunk driving, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. These are mothers whose kids were killed in car crashes because of drunks. They organized, they're very effective. They drove down the drunk driving rate, not by getting social programs going, but by getting the law enforced. And it spread all across the world. Ireland was an awful place for drunk driving. The Irish are great now. I couldn't get over it. You can't get your friends to go out for a drink in a pub in Ireland anymore. Well, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but some of my Irish friends here know it's not a terrible exaggeration. The drinking has really changed that and that's an effect of that group over in the States gradually spreading across. Okay. That's government's main protection is protecting. The foundational relationship in society is the marriage. And look, within the social sciences, this has been proven so much that anybody who doesn't take it really has ill will and has no interest in trying to find the truth. And that's the main thing we're up against. And we're even up against that now in academia, where a lot of social scientists have ceased being social scientists. Any scientist is always open to the data. He may not agree that this is a good experiment or a good piece of research, but then if it's important, he'll tackle it, and they disagree, you get it replicated, and eventually you sort it out. But if something is replicated and proven and all the rest, then essentially that debate is over. And the social sciences are no good at integrating findings. There's a big difference between them and the physical sciences, where if there's a real breakthrough in chemistry or a real breakthrough in physics and it's replicated, it's very quickly taken and integrated into the whole academy or into courses of teaching and all the rest. That's not the case in the social sciences because they're so dependent on the view of man that the teacher has. And actually, we're all part of that. We have our own view of ourselves, view of human nature. If we hear data doesn't fit, we're inclined to just throw it out. But in science, all sciences, and for social sciences, it holds just as much. The most important data is the data that does not fit, not the data that fits. We're all inclined to take the data that fit. The data that doesn't fit is the one where the breakthroughs at insight are made. So any social scientist worth his salt is always going to be grappling with the data that doesn't fit his view of things. And that's where I've learned the most, however, without getting it to me. Let's go on. The effect of the sexual revolution. This here is 1950 over here, and that's the year 2000. The green at the bottom is the out-of-wedlock births, and the other is divorce. This is per 100 children born in a particular year. What proportion of children that year enter either out-of-wedlock births or that? You suffered much the same here since the year 2000. In the US now, at age 17, only 46% of American 17-year-olds are living with their biological mom and dad. 54% is split. It's not too different here. Among African Americans, which is our weakest family structure, at age 17, 17% are in an intact family. 83, it's broken. And in the black family, actually, we now have many generations of essentially fatherlessness. One of the huge impacts of happening in the breakdown in the family, when that happens, normally is the man is either kicked out or leaves. In the States, it's mainly he's kicked out, because it's mainly 70% of the divorces are initiated by the wife. It's a pretty stable figure over the last few decades. But the man goes off, and then he's disconnected gradually from his family. The mother takes care of the kids. It's tough, but she has meaning in her life. She works hard, and she's dedicated to the kids. She has real meaning. Gradually, the guy has less and less. And you can see, and the boy, let's look at the brother and sister in the broken family. The girl has got the modeling of a strong mother doing her best. The boy has no modeling, and his father's away. Now you look at the education data. I haven't looked at it here, but in the US, here's a summary of it. Girls' scores are going up on everything. boy scores on average are going down on everything. And now in every dimension of education in the US, girls are outstripping boys. And that's very bad for the future of marriage, because girls don't marry down, by and large. They want to marry up. Or they want a guy who can bring in enough to take care of the family. And if he can't do that, no matter how charming he is or all the rest of them, the parents don't want them because they're taking on a huge burden. So this is huge when this is happening. We have a program in the US called Title IX, which was to sort of equalize everything in education for the girls. Well, Title IX should be flipped overnight and all the money going to the boys now, if there was any rationale and reasonable thinking going on. But that's not going to happen because the feminists are essentially in charge there as anywhere else. Oh, this is where Family Education Trust affected survey data and the debate in the US. One of your publications, and I hear it's on sale back there, Broken Homes and Broken Children, 1994. You have charts in there on abuse rates. I changed them slightly in this chart, which is to put the rate by population rate so that you could do comparisons of rates across the different family structures. And in that, the intact married family had the least amount of child abuse. And the biological mother cohabiting with a boyfriend, in that data, I have it correct, is 33 times higher, and the other family structures in between. I was in a position to affect we have a survey called the National Incidence Survey, which is a national survey to capture abuse rates. It's the most difficult type of survey to do, because essentially what they're going out and they're asking somebody, when's the last time you beat up your husband? Or your kid, or something. And of course, people don't say. But there's all sorts of tricky, the methods have been used out over the time, and we do our best, and it's pretty reliable stuff. Based on this, the US had no family structure measuring in it. We got it in, and now we have very good national data that you can use here, and it's derived from this, because it was this research that was the whole justification for changing and getting the family structure into the National Incidence Survey. And this is sexual abuse among children from the NIS4, which came out in 2010. They do these about every 6 years. It's a complex survey, and they do it about every 6, 7 years. So there'll be another one coming out soon. There, the rates are from intact married family on sexual abuse of children. It's almost 19.8 times higher, where what I call the step cohabiting is the mother cohabiting with a boyfriend who's not the father. Sexual abuse is 20 times higher there. The single parent alone, almost 5. Intact cohabiting, by the way, that's significant. That's the natural family cohabiting. Sexual abuse is 5 times higher than in the married family. They're not equivalent in this area. And this is in, oh no, that's the British data, let's go back. And this is the physical abuse, which with the stepmother or the mother cohabiting with the boyfriend, it's 10 times higher than there. If you look at the intact cohabiting, 4.3 times higher. So the natural, what we still call natural, but not married, intact cohabiting. That's real biological mom and dad. So that's the US data on that. And we have to thank Family Education Trust that we have this here in the US. On this, by the way, this is very hard to find data where you can read the abuse. We were able to get it, as an interesting story. The Department of Justice has a national crime victimization survey. And for a certain segment of females, mothers, we were able to get the data. And there we found that in the intact married, this is for women, the abuse of women with children under 12. That was the population. I was at the Heritage Foundation myself, and Robert Rector did this research, and we published it. The National Organization of Women, the radical feminist group, immediately held a press conference denouncing us for all sorts of things here. And they had some of the bureaucrats from the Department of Justice, where this survey came from, agreeing with them. So we went toe-to-toe with them in the press, and with Congress, and they backed right off because our data was correct. What that shows, what we were saying is, the patriarchal family, and by that the feminists mean the traditional intact married family, is the safest place for a woman. You got the lie that it's the most dangerous place for the woman. No, it's the safest place for the woman. It's the safest place for the kids, etc., etc. You know the rest of the story. But it was fun to do battle in public. The Irish and me like that, particularly when we won. Okay, I've been through that. Now I want to go, this here is recent data from 96, well, where the lines begin is around 75 and 80. And this is young people, different grades, and the black one that goes up highest, these are kids entering college. And these are the amount who have ceased practicing any religion. So that's on the rise. In other words, religious practice is on the demise or going down. Now the effect of, I came across this here, I did my dissertation on this, and I became very familiar with this survey. It's the National Longitudinal Survey of Adolescent Health, the largest survey we have in the United States on anything, 16,000. It's a huge sample. We're able to do all sorts of subdivision. This here is national average. So this is a demographic picture of grade point average in the United States in the mid-90s. And we're now tracking these kids. This is a longitudinal survey. So the kids in that were in high school. They're now in their 30s, and we can do all sorts of that. It's a great survey. We can do all sorts of analysis with it. But here, we have, this here is weekly worship. A couple of times a month, a couple of times a year, never. Grade point average. A perfect score would be 4. This is a grade point average of math and math and English combined. Weekly, the kids in the United States who go to church weekly, on average, are doing the best. Now, and as a couple of times, this was the beginning of what became a very fruitful line of research, and I'll show you some of it later. You get these type of outcomes no matter what you look at in the US federal data. There's no other country in the world that has survey data that measures religion as well as family. We have eight major national surveys. There may be one or two others. I haven't found them yet because we got zillions of government has zillions of surveys, but there are 8 national ones. And I have a total of 150 different measures. And I published it on our website. I'll give you at the end. You can go see them from all these different walks of life. And I'll show you some here. But on every measure, here's the way it goes. The main thing is the slope. Is it going to be steep? Now, that's a bit exaggerated. But in any case, the main thing is the slope. How steep is the effect of religious practice? And on the positives, those who worship weekly always do best. Worst changes place, actually, between a few times a year and never. And the friend who introduced me to this was a major scientist from NIH, cardiologist, epidemiologist, and the effect of religion on on the health of the heart and longevity was his specialty. He pointed out to me, he said, you know, Pat, if you look at the measure fear of death, the people who anxiety about that coming, said, the people who have the greatest anxiety about death are these folk, not these. Not the ones who never worship God, but the ones who believe in Him but didn't pay too much attention to Him during the year. At least that's the way I interpret it. Okay, but by and large, religious practice goes that way. Sometimes it's a bit of a bump that way. But those who worship weekly on every single measure measured in the US data do best, adults or kids or both combined. And there's always a big gap between these two. That's a very significant gap. I don't know if you heard of it. George W. Bush, had a big social policy. His big social policy was No Child Left Behind, a huge effort to pull up grade scores on kids, and particularly poor kids. Essentially, it was a failure. They put billions and massive upheaval of schools to do measures and all the rest of it. And they tweaked it. They probably got about from there to there of a tweaking, which is almost barely measurable. Whereas the difference, look at this. And the difference between a couple of times a month and weekly is very significant. So those are, I see a few collars in the place, so very significant. Those who worship God only a few times don't do as well on any measure. Now, I don't want to get into a prosperity gospel here, saying, the more you go to church so that you'll be rich or something like that. America has that. I don't want to align myself with that. What you're really seeing here is an old classic phrase. Grace perfects nature. Grace builds a nature. The natural is amplified and grows to its fullest with a relationship with God. That's the way I interpret that. That's what I think is going on. Okay. Now what we have here, this is going to take a little bit of explaining, and the colors here are not coming out as vivid as I thought. But the two dark ones are in front. That very tall one. This is the intact married family that worships God weekly. And this tall one here in the front, the two in the front, they look black here. This is the intact married family that never worships. And we're looking at the same grade point average. Huge difference. There you see the difference that religious worship makes over and above the intactness of the family. Now, you all know the data on the impact of marriage on education outcomes. Here you have both combined. The two at the back, that one and that one, they're all the broken family structures, and this is the one that worships weekly, and this is the one that doesn't worship at all. And I can sum up all the rest of the measures. On every measure in those 150, this one does best and this one does worst always. And these two trade places for second and third place. And you begin to see, at least I think there's a bit of a pattern there, where religion is more protective, or where religion really kicks in the extra benefits. You see it very clearly in second and third place between these two. And one of the things I'd sum it up, on sex, booze, and drugs, religion is very protective. And when you think about that, a teenager who goes to church each Sunday and says his prayers at night or something like that, is much less likely to be chasing the girls and trying to bed them. It sort of doesn't go together. Though there is one real anomaly. And somebody asked me in a recent conference, is there any contrary data that you come out with? And one is, it's fascinating, and we can follow it up individually if anybody wants. But if you look, after a divorce, this holds, even after a divorce, the fact that the more religious worship, the more protected they are. Except that holds for the daughters in the family. For the boys in the family, and it's the only instance where I have come across, the more the boy worships, the more he'll bed the girls. For the girl, it goes the other way. The more she worships, this is a daughter of a divorced couple, it will be protective of her. For the boy, it has the very opposite effect. And it's the only measure I've ever come across of that contrary stuff. And if anybody's interested in following up on the hypothesis, I have one. It's very Freudian, but I think it's true. And it has to do with God the Father. And the Son is imitating his Father without him probably knowing it. The Father bedded his mother and left. And the more you bring him to worship of God the Father, the higher the anxiety gets. And in anxiety, he'll repeat the pattern. The more he goes towards that, he'll do what his father did, which is bed the girl and leave. That's my interpretation. However, I think it's interesting. Let's go on. Ever received a bachelor's degree? Education, totally different outcome. There you have it. Weekly, a couple of times a month, a couple of times a year, never. This is very interesting. Mark Regnerus, who wrote the book Cheap Sex, which you have down there, this is his work from the same survey, the Ad Health survey, the one we were looking at. And this here is mothers in essentially the welfare parts of inner city. Poor mothers, most of them black, most of them single mothers. The more they bring their kids to worship, the better they do at school. By the way, this is the middle class controlling for stuff, and they don't get the same benefits at all. The way you could sum up this research, the way Mark sums it up, what this means, if you translate it into ordinary terms, is like moving the mother out of the inner city poverty area into a middle-class home and sending the kids to a middle-class school in those homes. In the US, the schools in the districts are tied very much to the income of the parents. And the schools in middle-class districts do much better than schools in the inner city. So huge effect. This is repeating a grade from a different survey. And you can see here, this is the intact married family worships weekly. This is the broken family doesn't worship at all. These are kids in these families. So there you see a huge effect in family life, church attendance. Oh yeah, this is an interesting one. Those who don't have dinner with their kids, this is back in the 90s. It's least in the family that worships weekly. The less worship, the less inclination there is to be dinner with the kids, time with the kids. Sexuality, this one I love. Oh no, I'm getting into the area of love. Rates of virginity, the more, this is for women, the more they worship, the more likely they are in their 23 to 25 to still be virgins. For men, the same thing holds, not as high, but quite a dramatic difference. Ever pregnant by church attendance? This is the one I wanted to get to. The percentage who feel thrilled and excited during intercourse with their current sexual partner. Hugh Hefner got it totally wrong. Playboy has it upside down. The other guys, look, we're the experts on sex. Those worship weekly, intact family. Intact family don't worship at all. Broken family, worship. Broken family don't worship at all. It gets even higher, actually, if you dig in more and more in that. But that holds no matter which way you look at the sexual. Religious worship. Now, if you're to measure UK kids at age 20, well, the kids who are going to church are hopefully not jumping into bed all that much, and the guys and girls who are jumping into bed are probably enjoying it quite a bit. So the data's not going to come out that way. You probably have to go into the mid-30s to mid-40s to really get good national sample data on that. But this is, by the way, there's a huge thing behind this, and this is part of the reason I'm presenting you with the religious data, is to think about it. Now, there is a public policy aspect in this, if you can pull it off. House of Lords or House of Commons, get religious practice. Better to avoid the denominational stuff. You don't want to get into denominational stuff. Just the frequency of religious practice. I'm going to cut it right here because I lost track of time. And I did want to have some time for questions. And we only have 6 minutes left. That's an interesting enough place to stop. And you've got the main idea. Religious practice is huge in the whole area that you're dealing with. What I was going to say, if you can, the House of Commons, get the data points into some of the key surveys so that you can measure it and bring it into the public discourse and begin to defend your own freedom of religion, which is really needed here in this country from all the stuff we've been picking up over. So, time for questions.